American citizen that China is dying to arrest. Samuel Chu managed to unite Democrats and Republicans to stand up for Hong Kong. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Democrats and Republicans are not known to get along, especially during the Trump administration. But Hong Kong activist Samuel Chu managed to successfully lobby Congress to pass not one, but two major bills supporting Hong Kong with bipartisan support. The Trump and Biden administrations have used these bills to slam Hong Kong and Chinese officials with devastating sanctions. How do you do it? I had the chance to sit down with Samuel at this year's Oslo Freedom Forum in Miami. It's an international human rights conference with activists from around the world. The theme this year was Truth Ignited, the idea that all it takes is one person standing up to inspire others. So please enjoy and be inspired. Samuel, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, so this is exciting because you are the first American citizen who is wanted by the Hong Kong government for violating the national security law, specifically for inciting subversion and colluding with foreign forces endangering national security. How does it feel to be wanted?
I never had, it was not on my bucket list, first of all. And as I've told the story a number of times, I was watching reruns of Law and Order in bed, and then I woke up the next morning, a wanted fugitive, and it seemed like it was just one of those things that it was inevitable once they implemented the national security law. Mm-hmm. But the unique thing, as we said, is that I'm the first U.S. citizen. And I'm not sure who I'm colluding with, since I'm actually working with my own government to try to advance democracy and human rights in Hong Kong. And so, I guess you could be a foreign forces.
You don't know who I am.
Yeah.
Well, so I take it no trips are planned for going back to Hong Kong anytime soon?
No, and that is actually one of the sad part is, the last trip I made was at the end of 2019. I actually attended and spoke at a rally out in Hong Kong the day that then President Trump, signed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which I helped to shepherd through Congress. I never thought that was going to be the last trip that I make to Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I bet you suspected the day was coming, but there's no way you could have known that was the time, right? It's just...
Yeah, and I think that's, in some way I even feel lucky because I knew the risk in doing this work of what it might mean. I've known it not just for myself, but for my family and for my father, who were involved in the movement for 30 plus years. Just imagine the people who never really even had a choice. People now, among the 7.5 million Hong Kongers there, who just had everything the rug pulled under them. They no longer enjoy the rights to free speech. They can no longer demonstrate and assemble publicly. They don't even have access to free press, the opposition paper that everybody relied on in Apple Daily. They never actually even had the choice to choose where they live and how they would live. And so in some way, I feel like my loss is pale in comparison.
Well, it certainly is very dark what's happening to Hong Kong, but I know you consider humor to be very important. Why is that?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that this work is hard. I think that, as I was talking to some of the fellow activists from around the world yesterday, they all had really, I think, some of the same experience and some of the same coping mechanism, which is that sometimes you just have to learn to understand sort of the irony and the humor in the repression that we really see. I remember in the sort of beginning days and early days of the protests in Hong Kong, the government at one point had banned the use of masks publicly because people were going to protest and then wearing masks. And then at the same time, they had a health ordinance that require you to wear a mask when you're in groups. And so we were just laughing, trying to think of ways to frame how not only unreasonable, but just how funny it is for a regime to try to suppress free speech and tying themselves into a knot and saying that, well, you really should wear a mask, but you can't when you protest. And so I think that kind of seeing the humor, I think in that is important. And then in the tactic is also important. I remember when Daryl Morey, the then general manager of the Houston Rockets, was called out for retweeting a supportive tweet to Hong Kong. I was just talking to a group of activists. I called a group of them in DC because it just turned out that it was a preseason of the NBA at that point. The Washington Wizards that evening was playing the Guangdong Dragons, I think it was. And for those of you who know this, nobody wants to go to a Wizard game. And nobody wants to go to a preseason Wizard game with a Chinese basketball league opponent. So the tickets were dirt cheap. So I just bought a bunch of tickets and told people to hold up signs so that they can, say that they stand with Hong Kong or Free Hong Kong or Uyghurs or whatever it is. Just get yourself kicked out of the stadium. Best $5 I ever spent per ticket. And and I think sometimes you have to figure out both in being able to see the humor, but also use humor in a way of countering the kind of repressive environment that we now live in.
Well, on that point, I know you have a Hong Kong bank account. Tell us about that.
Well, so it's one of the first questions that people always ask. So when you now are pursued, under the national security law, even previously pursued by the Chinese government, one of their favorite tactic is that they freeze your bank accounts. They usually try to trump up some charges and say you were money laundering or you were misstating your purpose of why you have your bank account. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong. Actually, my parents, when I was young, started a bank account for me. This was 40 years ago. And I never closed it. So, it's one of those bank accounts that if you're from Hong Kong or from, any sort of Chinese culture, you know that once a year, Chinese New Year, you get rent envelopes and then, you get money when you're a kid. And so my parents would used to just put money in it. And so when my arrest warrant was issued, one of the first things that people would ask is, well, what about your assets and things? Let me just be clear. I don't own any business in China. I don't have any asset that is worth for them to go after. But I just thought that it would be so interesting if I left a bank account with $200 and they decide to seize and froze my account. That would actually generate news. And in a lot of ways, it's exactly what happened when the arrest warrant was issued. I don't think that they really fully anticipated, understood how productive that action would be for the movement.
Because you are an American citizen.
Exactly. I mean, I hope it's not some poor intern in the foreign ministry office who missed the fact that I'm not a Chinese citizen. But they confirmed everything that, I feel very fortunate. I've been in the US for a long time. I feel very established and my public profile has offered me a lot of protection. Just think about all the thousands of other dissidents who does not get that protections, whose family members are in the mainland. And what my case has done is to confirm all of those other people's experience.
Well, now let's shift topics a bit. I want to talk about all of the lobbying you've done to the U.S. government. You were behind a lot of the bills the U.S. government passed supporting Hong Kong. Can you tell us about that process? I mean, you were able, in 2019, when things were incredibly politically divided, you got Republicans, Democrats, and Trump to all agree on something.
Yeah. I think I remember I won't name them, but a member of Congress stopped me once in the lobby while we were walking and joked with me that, in 2 years, you guys have accomplished all the legislative priorities you ever want. It's all downhill from here because you don't really have anywhere else to go. And I think that it was partly, obviously teasing, but also I think just a demonstration of how persistent the people of Hong Kong has been. Because I have always from the beginning said, the credit ultimately goes to the people in Hong Kong who, after decades of protests, back in 2014 when they occupied the central financial districts, to 2019 when they came out again and again when 2 million people came out on the street. That is the very foundation. That is the foundation of everything that we were able to do. But I think that one of the things I recognized in 2019 that was really important for me was that just having the protest movement on the ground is not enough. There needed to be a way of translating that into political influence, particularly in a place like the US. Because I think people sometimes forget that the Human Rights and Democracy Act, that we passed in 2019 was introduced in 2014. But just like in this cycle of social media news, once you're off the front page, you're not going to get the vote and you're not going to get the progress behind the scene. So what we were able to do is to actually take advantage of the momentum that was built in Hong Kong.
You were ready to take action.
And then really focus in on building a political base and influence in the US. And, again, a reporter from Hong Kong, from Apple Daily, former now Apple Daily, used to ask me, it's like, did your parents know that when they sent you here in 1990 that you were going to end up starting a movement in the US? And I was like, probably not. But there is something unique about that, right? Because we have so many human rights activists around the world who understands and passionate and are so deeply connected to their movement. But they still need a bridge to translate their interests and their goals to foreign government, to Western government, to US government, in a way that makes sense to the US political interests as well as the interests of the movement. And I think that is a really key catalyst that I think have been missing, and I'm just glad that we were able to play a role in those legislation. And I want to add, I think one more thing you point out exactly is that, Hong Kong, particularly for the last few years, has been one of the only legislative unicorn that both parties, support. Talk about humor. We used to make fun of the fact that there's one person in Congress who have consistently voted against every bill that we've done. Only one. It's a House member from Kentucky, but it turns out that he votes against everything human rights and everything foreign policies. He became very famous in Hong Kong, actually, because he was the one nay vote on all the bills that we have passed. And but again, understanding the intricacy and the complexity of the process is important, and having the way of translating the movement for Western audience, and then translating Western, global democratic actions around the world back to Hong Kong. That bridge is key.
So how do you deal with the fact that you're trying to lobby for change in the U.S. government, but at the same time, there are very powerful interest groups also lobbying the U.S. government to create a friendlier or normalized relationship with China?
Yeah, and I think that this is the part that I've worked in now U.S. politics for 2 decades, and it is the part that I think sometimes it's hard for people around the world to understand how U.S. politics works. This is the fundamental nature, is that we have competing interests. That's how our systems are function. And that's why I'm never afraid. I remember Hong Kong Free Press did a sort of investigative piece of earlier this year and the last year, where they discovered that the Hong Kong government and the trade office that they have has spent millions of dollars lobbying in the U.S. that pay for lobbyists. And that's like, I did that for 10%, 5% of the cost. And I think that there is this sometime, sort of people buy the fact that they can just buy their way in. But what I think our work in the movement in Hong Kong has been able to demonstrate is that if you're politically savvy about building relationships, understanding the interests of various parties and politicians in elected office, you can have greater impact. Because in some way, we are sort of the envy of the business lobby, right? They wish they don't have to pay millions of dollars to get a meeting. And we are able to engender and really create and cultivate that support and relationship without having to buy our way in. But once you get in, the hard work really is behind the scene. Because again, you can't, I think sometimes people just think of it as being the photo ops, but as you know, so much of the politics behind the scene is about negotiating competing interests. And I think for us, one of the things that we were successful at is to say that we're not afraid of competing interests. We're going to make our case and we'll work with the people that we can work with to get it done.
I know recently you were testifying that the Hong Kong National Security Act is being applied retroactively. Why do you think that matters? I mean, what's one more lie?
Well, I think that In fact, there's another thing this week that is along the same line. There's been now a proposal for an Article 23 security law to add it to the basic law. And they were using the exact same talking points that in addition to not being retroactive, they're saying that only applies for a very small, tiny group of people.
I'm sure this time it's true.
Yeah. And as I like to say, fool me once, really still shame on me, but fool me twice, like it's really one of those things that is important because now in this environment, the law itself is not just in the wording or in what is exactly written or passed or enacted. It is about the terror, sort of what is considered sort of the white terror that it creates broadly. So this is incredibly important when people think that it could be implemented or enforced retroactively, because it is actively erasing history, right? It is telling you that you better watch out if you want to bring up what happened in the past. Or you better watch out for what you do now, because we will use what you have done in the past as the basis of your prosecution. And I think it goes into that same buckets of sort of the erasure of history. When they shut down the Hong Kong Alliance, who have commemorated June 4th in Tiananmen Square for 30 plus years, there's a deliberate intention in silencing and rewriting history. And the retroactive implementation and enforcement of these laws is, I think, one of the most dangerous rewriting and erasure of history for the movement and for Hong Kong.
So obviously the Chinese Communist Party is not done with Hong Kong. What do you think they will do next, and what do you think the international community can do to prevent it?
That's always the question that everybody, I think, is looking for, is what can we do to reverse it? I think that you're already seeing, I think, the increasing, expanding sort of ripple effects. In 2 weeks of time this summer, the largest and oldest teachers' unions was shut down. They self-dissolved because a newspaper and a government official came out and said that you guys are really not professional teachers. And so you're a political organization that is advocating for secessions and endangering national security. That same week, you have the largest protest organizing, the Civil Human Rights Front, that have organized every million people march since 2002, also disband. And I think that just last week, the largest trade union that have existed for 30 plus years, folded. So you're seeing now that the Communist Party and the authority in Beijing, and then using the Hong Kong government, cracking down now on core civic public institutions in Hong Kong. I think what you will see is an escalation of that. If you're not going to fall in line, the law society in Hong Kong is already sort of on the blink of being targeted. They say, if you don't fall in line, we're going to force you to close. And it's not just going to stop at civic organizations and civil society organizations. Apple Daily was shut down in a matter of weeks. They are a corporation. They're an international corporation. And they have forced the company to essentially not pay their employee, froze their account, close their business, and their independent board of directors finally had to resign a few months ago and say that the only way we see this is just to dissolve the company, because we don't have any other way of continuing to do business. And that escalation, I think, is a real turning point here. Because for so long we've been saying to ourselves that, the more business is done in China, the more businesses continue to be done in Hong Kong, the freer everybody will be. We now have clear, undisputable evidence that that is not happening. That correlation, that sort of magical thinking is not happening. And so I think what you're seeing now, some of the response, we have done a lot of the work. We've imposed sanctions. We have actually pushed for much more strict reporting as far as what is happening on Hong Kong, but also the impact to American interests economically and politically. But I think what you will see now is that the business community and the international community are really going to have to think twice. If Apple Daily can be wiped out in a matter of weeks, if hostage taking, like the two Michaels from Canada and others, is actually a public foreign diplomatic tactic, you really need to be asking yourself, am I personally and is our company or our organization safe in engaging at any level? And what does that mean for American companies, for American investors, and for American taxpayers? And I think that we're now beginning to see that come into focus because of COVID, because of what's happening in Hong Kong, because of the situation with the genocide in Uyghurs. The pressure, I think, is finally shifting in the other direction of people saying that we're just not going to assume that free trade equals human rights.
Fool me once.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us today. For anyone watching, where can they follow you? How can they help add their voices to what's happening in Hong Kong?
So they can actually reach out to me or email me. I'm on Twitter. It's Samuel M. Chu, CHU. I'm on all the social media platforms. But I think that these days, unless you're in the mainland using the mainland firewall browser, if you type in Samuel Chu, you probably will find me.
Well, thanks again for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Maybe I'll see you at a Wizards game.
Thank you. Maybe not a Wizard game.
Thank you for watching, and a big thank you to the Oslo Freedom Forum for giving us the opportunity to meet with amazing activists from around the world. We'll be having more interviews with activists we met there in the coming weeks. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.